You wanna know what's shameful, Vic?
Working your whole goddamn life, having nothing to show for it. Still think there's good and bad, right and wrong. There ain't. There's just this. Survival. Security, pleasure. They don't give out awards for dying in the projects.
Welcome back, everyone. This is my breakdown of The Penguin, episode 3, titled Bliss. This episode is all about people trusting Oz and him doing what he does best, and that's making him think that he's on their side. Whether it be him building up the trust with Sofia, all for him to leave her high and dry at the end of this episode, or him giving Vic life lessons and building his confidence up, all for him to break him down by the end of this episode as well, but he still manages to hook one of them back into his fold by the end. Let's get into this breakdown. Spoilers ahead. We open this episode with a flashback before the flooding of Gotham in the Batman. We get a glimpse into Vic's life before Oz, as he's got a girl, he's got a mom and a dad and a sister, and everything seems good. He comes from a good family with good morals, as we see him having this conversation with his dad about his father asking for more money at work and him wanting his father to just want to ask for more, which to me was setting up his aspirations of how we've seen Vic so far in the previous 2 episodes, of him wanting and yearning for more, and what he spoke to with Oz back in episode 1, as his father responds by telling him that he has more than enough and that they can get by from what they have so far in their life. Now we can see that there seems to be some tension between Vic and his father as it pertains to who Vic is hanging out with, as we see him leaving home to hang out with his girls and his friends on a rooftop on the night of the election. Again, this conversation between him and his father I think highlights the idea behind Vic and him wanting to have this type of relationship with others who happen to be bad influence on him, again tying this into his connection with Oz. Now on this rooftop with Vic's friends, and we see him with his girl talking about how he likes to be here, but we see that she wants to make it out of Crown Point. Now I think we all kind of knew what was going to happen in this scene, as we know what happened with the Batman with the Riddler and his final riddle for the bombs going off in Gotham, but seeing it from this perspective of Vic's character, a character we've been following for the last 2 weeks, and even though it was brief, we got to meet his family. So seeing the waters coming into the city, the flooding beginning to happen, definitely created this emotional connection between us as the audience and also to Vic as the character. As we cut back to present day, we see Oz is getting ready to meet up with his new partner Sofia, as Vic will be their chauffeur for the night. Now so far this season, especially in this episode, we've seen Oz giving Vic some life lessons and building up his confidence, especially in this scene after giving Vic some new clothes, giving him some new swagger, giving him $1,000 to work for him a week, and also him telling Vic that he has to know his worth. I'm gonna be honest with you all, I know you got to start somewhere, but $1,000, Oz, that's all you can scrape up to give Vic, who's not only gotten rid of 1 but 3 bodies so far this season. He's also saved Oz from dying once, and we'll talk about what happens in this episode. But I mean, $1,000, Oz, like if I'm Vic in this position, I'm at least asking for at least $5,000 to $7,000 every other day. But that's just me. Back to the show, I love how this show sprinkles in comedy and how they do it in such a perfect way that doesn't take you away from like the serious tone of what the show's going for. Perfect example is that is where we see Oz getting the call from Blackgate, and we know Sofia's at the front door, and we see Oz leaving Vic to answering the door for her, and clearly he's nervous as hell to meet the hangman, as Oz tells Vic,
Give me some time.
Hold on, Oz. What if she asked me about her brother? Or Castillo?
Just tell you I had a hand in killing them both. See what happens.
Now we see Sofia and Vic officially meet for the first time this season, as she looks around at Oz's, as she calls it, tacky place, as they're making some small talk. Now again, it's clear as day that Vic is nervous as hell to be talking to Sofia, and you can't blame him, but in this conversation we find out a couple things as Sofia's kind of eyeing him up and trying to get some information about Victor the mechanic and getting his name and everything. But within this conversation we find out that Oz actually used to be Sofia's driver back in the day. Which, speaking of old times, we see Sofia makes a change of plans and she makes Oz drive them for the night, leaving Vic to hanging back and calling the person he's been avoiding calling back so far since last episode. As we check in with Sofia and Oz, we see that Sofia follows through with her brother's plans with using the jewels in exchange for this new drug that we see is being delivered through Arkham State Hospital containers. As it appears that Sofia was the one that actually set up this drug transaction, as it makes me think about what I mentioned in my last week breakdown involving Dr. Rush. Now for those that might have missed my breakdown last week, what I talked about in that video was, what if Dr. Rush is this show's version or Matt Reeves' version of the Scarecrow, and what if he's been testing this drug on his patients, which we actually find out this was the case later in this breakdown. Now, Oz meets the chemist who goes by the name of Trey Bloom, who shows him the operation behind this new drug that's being developed, and it used to be used on the patients of Arkham, as Oz believes that it's just this type of small party drug, but it's actually described as...
They're the basidiospore. These are bleeding tooth fungi, a rare strain. The psychoactive compound in the sap creates a potent euphoric stimulant. It's a completely different high.
Again, could this be the beginnings of Scarecrow fear toxin within this universe? As we see Sofia giving the task to Oz to finding them a distributor. Now back with Vic, we see that he invites his girl over to Oz's place, and after catching up, we do get the confirmation that both of these characters have lost their families in a flood, and we also find out that his girlfriend is wanting to move to California, and she wants to be leaving within the next 24 hours, and she wants him to go with her. Now Vic tells his girlfriend about half of the truth of who his boss is and what he's been doing, as he says that he's seen some things that will prevent him from leaving. Now, Oz is headed back to his place as Vic gives his girl some cash and tells her that he's going to try to figure out a way to tell Oz that he wants to leave to go with her to California. Now back with Sofia and the Falcones, we see that they're laying low after recent events as Johnny not so nicely gives Sofia her ticket to Italy as requested by her uncle Luca. Now Johnny's getting really bold around Sofia as he shares his thoughts on how he feels about her.
I know you're not right in the head. I mean, that's pretty damn clear. But I'm not scared of you. All I see is a spoiled bride who got what she deserved.
So not only does he share his true feelings about how he feels about Sofia, but he also gives her 2 days to gather up all her things and to leave to Italy, or else he'll be telling people that that's where she went, basically threatening to kill and get rid of Sofia. I don't know about y'all, but I would not be threatening Sofia, who goes by the name of the Hangman. That's wild to me. But I'm telling you right now, whether it's Oz or now Sofia, Johnny will 100% get killed in the most horrific way when it comes to his death, sometime I would imagine in this season. Now, as we see Oz getting his plan into motion with the triad deputy by the name of Link, they want to begin their process of getting an authorized partnership to start pushing this new drug by the name of Bliss. Now, one of my favorite elements about this particular episode was seeing Oz and Sofia working together as we have in this scene, them talking to Link about this operation. It was just so great because Oz, as we know that he does, lies about everything. As he talks about having the blessing from the Falcone family and he mentions Johnny's involvement, you'll notice how Sofia is just rolling her eyes at him the whole time, just kind of playing along with his lies. But secretly, I love how Oz, even though it kind of seems like things feel random or he's just saying things that come to the top of his mind, but he's so smart in bringing up Johnny because, again, this is just setting Johnny up for obviously the relationship he has with Luca's wife, obviously the beef and tension that Oz knows that he has with Sofia. So throwing Johnny into the mix, so if things do kind of fall apart, again, it's going to all kind of tie around to Johnny being the bad one, Johnny being the rat, Johnny being the one sleeping with his wife. So again, things might seem random when Oz does things like this in this scene, but again, he's always like this super calculated and he's like 10 steps ahead of everybody. Now, to prove Oz's word, Link wants him to get confirmation from Johnny himself over the phone to his boss, as the plan is to have a trial run for the night at this club with an audience to see if things go smooth, and if they do, they'll get closer to going into business with this boss who is a bigger fish in this game, and to position themselves as a new fourth within Gotham and to move closer to Sofia taking over the family business. Meanwhile, while all this is going down, outside we see Vix in Oz's car watching over the Bliss. He's also coming up with lines and practicing what he's going to say to Oz in regards to him leaving Gotham. While he's doing that, we see Gotham's finest asking Vic to step out of the car. Now, to avoid to get busted with the Bliss in the back seat and to get in trouble, we see Vic taking lessons from Oz. He's thinking quick on his feet as he gives the officer his weekly allowance, and that allows the officer to walk away without him getting into trouble. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this episode really put an emphasis on showing Oz really building Vic up as we head to the scene with him and Vic having this really earnest conversation and an honest conversation with one another as they're at this restaurant. Now, in this conversation, we see Vic shares what his parents used to do for a living. And again, just notice how Oz is trying to play this role of a mentor or this big brother / boss to Vic, and he wants Vic to start trusting him. He wants him to, again, build in a confidence and having the server being corrected of not allowing Vic to talk with his stutter and just having him building himself up. Again, Oz is so smart in manipulating people into making them believe in him and to trust in him. Now we find out that they're not just going out to eat to enjoy each other's company. We see that Oz, again, is part of his plan, as we see that he wants to speak to Tina, who we find out is Luca's wife. Now ultimately we see Tina gives Oz the key to the room where her and Johnny will hook up, I assume, on a regular basis, as Oz and Sofia confront Johnny and make him fall in line with their plans and having Sofia replacing Luca. Now Johnny, being Johnny, begins talking smack to Oz about the lack of trust people have towards him, as we see that this is clearly getting under Oz's skin. But the thing that takes him over the edge is we see that Johnny calls him the Penguin yet again, but he also makes it in a way that you're only used for entertaining purposes only, which brings out that impulsive nature of Oz as he shoves the phone in Johnny's mouth, forcing him to call, or else he's going to tell Luca about the affair, which we know he doesn't want that to happen. So ultimately Johnny makes the call. He's now kind of working with Sofia and Oz in order to make things smooth over. But again, I just love when we get to see Oz just having his impulse taking the best of him, his instinctive nature getting the best of him. And during that whole scene, Sofia not saying much of a word, she's just so perfect. Her charisma, her presence is just so great. But I have to admit, I love seeing Oz shoving that phone in Johnny's mouth and making him shut the hell up. Now at the club, we see Oz has his team assembled, as we see they're going to start spreading out the bliss to the fine people of Gotham, as Vic is being the bag man. Again, we see Oz prepping him up, building him up. I want you all to notice Sofia sees Oz kissing Eve, and to me, that is Sofia paying attention to her surroundings, keeping this in her memory bank just in case she has to use Eve against Oz at some point later down the season. And how Oz is kind of gloating over this situation as she has to remind Oz who's in charge of the situation, as they talk about what happened between them 10 years ago, which involves Oz being the one that told Carmine that Sofia needed to go. More on that situation a little bit later. Now as the conversation is going on with the adults, we check in with Vic, and I'll be honest with you all, seeing Vic as the bag man and seeing how the scene played out in the club, was it me, or did this scene kind of feel like I was watching Arrow, which I used to love Arrow, but after a while it got a little bit cheesy, but it felt like I was watching a CW show. It was clearly my least favorite moment of the episode, just seeing the scene play out, especially when Vic, and I get what the show's doing, when we see Vic and his flashbacks to the nights of the flood and him having a panic attack. Again, I understand, I respect the perspective of Vic, because honestly, Vic is the character that is the only one that's not completely corrupted, as we see the corruption is starting to change him, especially in this episode, and changing his morals. But his side story wasn't the best part of this show to me as far as this episode goes, compared to seeing Sofia and Oz and them building their relationship in the episode. That was the key and the best moments, but every time we would check into Vic, it just felt off. Which, speaking of, we see Sofia talking to the head boss about how this drug will be used.
That's why they gave it to us in Arkham. It made us content, submissive. Any pain that we had just floated away, allowing us to forget where we were. It's a very powerful drug, and whoever controls it will control the future of the drug trade in Gotham.
Now again, we do get confirmation in the scene that Bliss was used on the patients of Arkham. And again, it seems to me that this show is setting up Dr. Rush to maybe being involved. And again, I could be wrong, but I think this might be the show's version of Scarecrow. Or at the very least, they're at least planting the seeds for this drug being like counter-programmed to becoming that fear toxin later on in the actual Batman movies. Now ultimately the deal ends up getting made. Meanwhile, we see Vic and Oz having this falling out in the bathroom. We see Oz sees Vic texting his girl and talking about leaving, which leads to them having this confrontation, as Oz is telling Vic that he is squandering this opportunity to be better and to have more than his father ever had. Now as they're having this confrontation, Vic ultimately kind of leads up to this point where he feels like he's being held hostage, which is the complete opposite of how Oz feels about the situation that they've been under in the last 2 episodes. As Oz throws it back in Vic's lap, as he says that he could have left at any point, but he wanted to stay because he wanted more, he wanted better. as Vic tells Oz that his father wouldn't approve of this lifestyle. Now to Vic, and to honestly my surprise, we see that Oz allows him to walk out, which Vic leaves, and we see that Vic uses that confidence he's been building this episode, and he ultimately takes Oz's car. We get this kind of weird moment in the episode where the characters are pondering. We see that Vic goes to the bus station. He ultimately decides to stay. Meanwhile, we see Oz at the bar kind of thinking about what just happened. And this episode was just so melodramatic to me. Going back to my favorite part of this episode, and that's Sofia and Oz as they have it out and have this conversation about him being the reason she went to Arkham, and the things getting really emotional between these two characters. We get some truth from both characters and them removing their egos as we learn that Sofia isn't the hangman, which I talked about in my last video, which again makes me think that she was covering up from either her brother or her actual father, who were probably the real hangman and killing these women, most likely her father more than her brother, as we see Oz like finally legitimately being honest with someone as he tells her that he doesn't regret what he did and sending her to Arkham, because at the end of the day, he got what he really wanted in life. And you'll notice again the emotional depths that these characters going through, at least from my perspective. Sofia was being earnest and being genuine. We see both of the characters somewhat getting teary-eyed in this scene. Again, I think Sofia was being 100% honest in this conversation, and I do believe that Oz was being 50-50 in this moment as well. As she says to Oz,
I don't know where to go from here. I don't know how to trust you.
But I keep showing you how.
but look, at the end of the day, this is Gotham, and there's no time for truths to be revealed left and right, and honest conversations and earnest conversations, as we see Nadia pulls up with her men who have guns in their hands pointed at Sofia and Oz. Now, Vic ultimately comes back to the club, and yet again, he's been learning from Oz to think quick on his feet, to have those instincts, as he saves Oz yet again by hitting a man who's pointing a gun at them. As we see, Oz hops in the car, and this was such a big moment for me, because after building this trust with Sofia, essentially, he leaves her there as we see him leaving her behind. And my question is, what now? I'll admit to you all, out of the 3 episodes that we've gotten so far, not saying that this was a bad episode at all, but to me, this was my least favorite out of the 3. Now, positively speaking, I thought everything with Sofia and Oz was electric. It was interesting. It was complex. We got to see these characters kind of removing their egos at certain points, especially at the end of this episode, but also them reminiscing about the old days, and also them kind of squaring each other up and working with each other throughout this episode, as we see that Oz is trying to allow himself to be trusted by somebody. Also seeing Sofia allowing her guard to be down and having some vulnerable moments. Meanwhile, watching Oz be a manipulator, being the one that's trying to gain people's trust, whether it was Vic, whether it was Sofia, and having some honest moments with them at the same time. I just love the way that they're portraying this character. But again, we see Sofia getting the emotional moments towards the end of this episode and having him close the deal. And again, her relieving that pressure, her giving trust into Oz. Now, taking all this trust and applying that to what we got going on with Vic, him getting the new clothes, him getting money, him taking charge and being the bag man and cheering him on as, again, this father figure, this mentor, him talking about how his dad was a good man and raised a good son, all that to make Vic feel like he's important. All these little moments building him up and being this encouraging person to Vic, and by the end of the episode, it actually worked. Instead of Vic doing the right thing and leaving Gotham, leaving this lifestyle behind, he ultimately came back to Oz. He saved Oz. Again, this show is kind of showing Oz being the representation of like the corruption within Gotham, and him corrupting this innocent person. Well, I don't want to say innocent, but this good person with good morals in Vic. And he doesn't leave. He saves Oz. He comes back. And if you're keeping count like I am, I'm pretty sure that when he hit that man that had the gun, the Maroney's man that had the gun on Oz and Sofia, I'm pretty confident that we saw Vic kill his first person in this show. He's gotten rid of now, 3 bodies, he's killed someone, and we're seeing the progression and the change in the Victor character. Now, speaking of Vic, and just speaking to him in this episode, I get what the show is doing, how they're using the character as a representation of what Oz and also Gotham can do to someone like Vic. But to me, it's the execution that kind of felt off in this episode. Like, I feel like we're seeing this other side of Vic, but it feels kind of rushed. Like, just think about this. He just lost his entire family like less than a week or 2 weeks ago. And I don't feel like the emotional damage has really come up into the presence of this character. Again, I know he's having anxiety attacks in this episode and whatnot, but having that type of traumatic experience, it's not holding the weight for me yet. Like, I don't feel the depths of the character being torn on what to do. Like, I don't feel like it was that executed that well within this episode. Just thinking about the scenes and how they were framed in this episode with Vic, and particularly in the club, it just felt cheesy. It felt YA, felt freeform meets some CW type of approach. So again, I'm not saying I don't like the Vic character. I just feel like the way that the show handled him and how they applied the pressure to showing us as an audience, the emotions that he went through just wasn't done that well, in my humble opinion. And I don't know if I fully bought into Vic being a good kid from a good family into immediately after the flood, he goes from trying to rob Oz, covering up murders, selling drugs, murdering someone himself. How do you all feel about Vic in the show so far? Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments below. But also, I have another question for you all. How do you feel about the flow of the show? So far, 3 episodes in, each week we've seen every episode being centered around obviously Oz, but being centered around him not dying. Is that gonna get old? Like, every week we're gonna see him weasel his way out of escaping death and talking his way out of not being murdered. Again, it's been handled so far so good, but I don't know if it's going to feel repetitive after week 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let me know how you all feel about the flow of the show so far in the comments below as well. Now, after what happened at the end of this episode, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen with Johnny after making the call and now being a part of this Bliss operation? Will Oz continue to use him as far as using him sleeping with Luca's wife against him as we go through the rest of the show? Again, I know the creators came out and said that Batman will not be in this show, and I understand why, and I get that, but there is a new drug on the street, Batman. Does Batman have anything to say about that? I'm very curious about how they're going to handle that moving forward. But my biggest question after this episode is, what now with Oz and him and the Maronis? Like, obviously that's been something that's been kind of handled in a way that it doesn't feel as threatening as I think the show wants us to think it is, but what does it mean now? He's killed one of the Maronis' men. He killed someone last week and this week. But also, what's going to happen between Oz leaving Sofia behind? Will Nadia take Sofia hostage, leaving Oz to negotiating with Saul to letting her go and getting him in on the cut of exchanging the Bliss for Sofia? Now, what if Sofia managed to get away and she's not held hostage? How in the hell will she ever trust Oz again after he left her there to essentially die? Now, if you all have made it to this point in the video, I can't thank you enough for the continued support. You all are awesome. Do me a favor if you're still here, put in the comments right now, #Bliss. I'll be back next week to discuss episode 4, and I would love for you all to come back and join me. Now, if you have enjoyed these conversations, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit the share button to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show just as much as we do. And also, more importantly, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. What did you think about this episode? Is it your favorite, least favorite, somewhere in the middle? What do you think about Vic? Do you feel like things have been rushed? What did you think about the relationship between Oz and Sofia? And what now after what happened at the end? Let me know your thoughts about that. But also, consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell notification. Now, between now and next week's episode, definitely make sure to check out my full breakdown of the Joker 2. I have a spoiler-free review and a spoiler breakdown. And also check out my DC Weekly News video going over the latest news in the DC universe. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.